What if the most decisive clash of an entire year, perhaps even the hinge of modern European history, ended before the world at large even registered the first explosion? Imagine a battle so thoroughly shaped by what was unseen, unknown, and unspoken that its outcome was sealed in silence, long before a single shell had flown. In the chill of early autumn, as frost licked the grass in the borderlands and the leaves began to turn, Russian military intelligence, an organization with roots reaching back to the days of czars and revolutionaries, began to sense a disturbance beneath the surface. Their analysts, many of whom had spent decades decoding the moves of adversaries, caught odd, persistent signals, anomalies that defied their usual models. These weren't the kinds of anomalies you could easily explain away. Satellite images, for example, revealed unusual surges in rail traffic deep within central Ukraine. Trains 10, 20, even 30 cars longer than usual, crawling westward under thick tops that hid their contents. Intercepted radio chatter, too, pointed to a spike in encrypted conversations among the Ukrainian command, with complexity and cadence that hinted at something urgent and new. But it wasn't just the data streams that told the story. The most alarming sign was the widening gap between enemy propaganda and ground realities. While official statements from Ukrainian spokespeople and their Western allies trumpeted exhausted resources and crumbling morale, Russian operatives traced the shadows of a much greater threat: a concealed, massive reserve force, assembling in secrecy hundreds of kilometers from the front lines, in places so remote that even local villagers noticed new faces, new vehicles, and strange comings and goings in the dead of night. Consider for a moment how such a mosaic is assembled. Each indicator, a train here, a burst of encrypted radio there, rumors of requisitioned fuel convoys on backwater highways, seems random at first. But together, they form a disturbing pattern. It's a lesson as old as the Trojan horse. The greatest threats are often hidden in plain sight, masked by the routine and the expected. In the Second World War, Allied intelligence broke the Enigma code and turned the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. In the Gulf War, American analysts detected the massing of Iraqi armor before the ground offensive. Today, the silent, invisible offensive is fought not just with spies and scouts, but with algorithms, satellites, and deep data mining. This is not just a tale of military cunning. It is the blueprint for how wars of the future will be fought and won. In this new era, intelligence, analysis, and the ability to dismantle adversarial illusions are the most critical weapons. Miss this hidden war, and you miss the essential lesson of our age, that the fate of nations hinges not just on firepower or resolve, but on who can master the shadows. The story you are about to hear is not merely about Ukraine and Russia. It is about the very future of global security. It is about the evolution of warfare, from brute force to brains, from trenches to terminals. To unravel how this invisible campaign rewrote the rules of power, we must trace the subtle moves and counter-moves that set the modern battlefield. We must look past the headlines and the propaganda, into the war rooms and the minds of those who see what others cannot. The first signs of the coming storm were so subtle that even seasoned analysts, men and women who had spent their lives stalking the faintest hints of danger, nearly dismissed them. Each clue was a thread, pulling them closer to an unseen crisis. A spike in train traffic, yes, but what about the sudden orders for camouflage netting from factories in Lviv? What about the fuel shipments vanishing from depots in Vinnytsia? What about the encrypted emails, routed through servers in neutral countries, that suddenly appeared in the logs of Ukrainian military attachés? You are about to see how a scattering of small clues can unravel a scheme involving tens of thousands of people and hundreds of millions of dollars in materiel. In this age, battlefields are made not only of mud and metal, but of shifting signals, feints, and decisions measured in split seconds. One misread hint, and entire fronts could crumble. This is not unlike the intelligence contest before the D-Day landings in World War II, where both sides tried to deceive, probe, and outguess the other. As the autumn of 2025 began, Russian intelligence caught a tremor. rail traffic in central Ukraine surged. Trains, longer and heavier than at any time that year, crept westward under thick tarps. Orbital cameras watched as the unmistakable shapes of armored vehicles and heavy machinery shifted in bulk, signaling a movement too vast to be routine. Most tellingly, some of these trains stopped at stations that had been dormant since the days of the Soviet Union, their platforms cleared and repainted overnight, suggesting not only a logistical operation, but a psychological one, meant to evade detection. Simultaneously, another current ran through the airwaves. Encrypted chatter between Ukrainian commanders soared, not just in volume, but in complexity. Fresh ciphers, never before intercepted, cloaked every word. This was not the ordinary business of war. It was a new level of secrecy, as if a phantom force had sprung up, communicating in tongues built to be unbreakable. It called to mind the coded messages sent by the Allies on the eve of Operation Overlord, or the radio silence that preceded the Yom Kippur War in 1973. But satellites only skimmed the surface. On the ground, analysts noticed fresh scars, hidden bases and supply hubs, expertly camouflaged and set deep in the Ukrainian interior, hundreds of kilometers from any front line. These were not fleeting camps. They were sprawling, bristling with mobile command posts and thick cables for field communications. The sheer scale pointed to preparations for something far beyond local skirmishes. This was the skeleton of a coming storm. For example, in the Poltava region, local farmers reported military trucks arriving at night, their lights blacked out, dumping crates and barrels into storage barns that had sat empty for years. In Kirovohrad, satellite infrared sensors picked up sudden drops in ambient temperature, suggesting the installation of portable air conditioning for electronics, the kind needed for high-level command centers. Yet, on Russian and international news, the narrative spun another tale. Ukrainian spokesmen claimed their reserves were depleted, their forces spent, their armies weary. Western analysts echoed these claims, pointing to casualty figures and images of tired soldiers. But the secret buildup told its own story. Reserves were not vanishing, but being quietly rebuilt and refitted. The gap between words and reality grew too wide to ignore. Where propaganda broadcast weakness, intelligence saw strength gathering in silence. For Russian analysts, the trial was immense. Behind every train car, every encrypted call, every rumor, lurked the chance of a ruse, a deception meant to mislead, to mask the true operation behind a smokescreen of false moves. The mission: pierce this fog, separate illusion from reality, and discover the real target before disaster struck. This was no ordinary contest. It was a race against time, with the fate of an entire theater on the line. A single misstep, one clue missed or misread, and Russian forces risked stumbling into a trap, unprepared for a blow that could cost not just a battle, but the war's direction itself. If this sounds dramatic, remember the fate of the French army in 1940, when misreading the direction of the German attack led to national collapse within weeks. Still, if the enemy's intentions were so carefully hidden, what allowed Russian intelligence to uncover the real plan? To answer that, we must step into the secret rooms where data, instinct, and experience collide, and see how the smallest detail can tip the scales of war. Imagine the dimly lit operations center, walls lined with screens, the air buzzing with the hum of servers, and the nervous energy of analysts who know that their work may alter the fate of millions. Imagine a battlefield twisted by illusion, a theater of phantoms where every tank could be air and every signal a snare. Here, nothing is certain, and every shadow might hide a deadly misdirection. This was not new in the history of war. During the Second World War, inflatable tanks fooled German reconnaissance before D-Day. In Desert Storm, American planners used dummy camps and radio traffic to mask the real axis of attack. But now, the scale had grown, the stakes multiplied by the power of modern connectivity. This was the heart of the enemy's grand deception, codenamed Masquerade. Across the open terrain near Kharkov and Sumy, Ukrainian forces deployed scores of inflatable tanks and dummy vehicles, so convincingly crafted that even high-resolution satellite imagery struggled to tell them from the real thing. From above, their forms and shadows mimicked real armored columns, designed to mislead any satellite or drone. But the illusion was not just visual. The airwaves brimmed with synthetic chatter, fabricated radio traffic simulating battalion commands. Electronic signals danced across frequencies, imitating the rhythms of true military coordination. All of it engineered to lure Russian surveillance to the wrong sectors, to mask the real preparations elsewhere. Think of the British Operation Fortitude, which used similar tricks to convince Hitler that the D-Day landings would come at Calais, not Normandy. The deception spread further, seeping into digital spaces. Disinformation flooded news outlets and anonymous channels, with Ukrainian sources loudly predicting a massive offensive in Kharkov and Sumy. Social media bots amplified these rumors in a dozen languages, making the world's attention pivot to the wrong place. Rumors grew, confusion thickened, and Russian attention was pulled thin across the map. On the surface, it was a flawless performance. Yet sharp-eyed analysts within Russian intelligence saw flaws behind the curtain. The fake radio exchanges echoed obsolete scripts, reused from earlier operations. Some of the dummy vehicles, under infrared, betrayed the telltale chill of unpowered engines. More crucially, the usual logistics were missing. No new field hospitals, no sudden influx of ammunition, no telltale convoy activity. These omissions spoke volumes. Russian analysts refused to be swept up by the spectacle. They searched for what was absent, not just what was presented. In this contest, the absence of evidence became its own kind of evidence. It was a lesson learned from chess grandmasters, who know that the piece not moved can be as telling as the boldest attack. Technology became their edge. Advanced electronic warfare systems, Krasuka 4, Murmansk BN, punched through the manufactured noise. Brief glimpses of genuine encrypted communications emerged, not in the decoy zones, but far to the west around Uman. The real command networks pulsed there, behind layers of new encryption. Technical intelligence sketched the contours, but it was the human element that brought clarity. Deep behind enemy lines, Russian operatives risked everything to confirm what machines only hinted at: the presence of a vast reserve force hidden in the shadows. Their reports were chilling: nearly 50,000 troops, fully equipped, waiting for the order to surge forward. It was reminiscent of the intelligence coups that changed wars: the discovery of the German Ardennes build-up before the Battle of the Bulge, or the catching of the Egyptian crossing plans in 1973 by Israeli spies. Now the masquerade unraveled. What was crafted to mislead instead exposed the enemy's true intentions. Russian command shifted focus, locking onto the genuine threat before it could strike. The stakes could not have been higher. One misstep, and the defensive lines would have collapsed, opening the gates to disaster. But by piercing the veil, Russian intelligence transformed a cunning ruse into a fatal liability for their adversaries. But intelligence was only the beginning. The next phase demanded swift, decisive action, turning knowledge into overwhelming force before the enemy could react. Historically, this is the pivot point that every strategist dreams of: catching the enemy not just in preparation, but in the instant of vulnerability. Napoleon won at Austerlitz by seeing what others could not. The Americans triumphed at Midway because they read the Japanese codes and struck first. Here, too, knowledge became power, and wars were decided in the mind, long before the first shot echoed across the field. In the chill of autumn, in the year 2025, the Russian General Staff achieved a rare synthesis. Space-based eyes, intercepted signals, and human informants blended into a single, living map. What the enemy thought hidden, Ukrainian reserves scattered and disguised, was suddenly exposed, their every move writ large in ones and zeros. Encrypted messages, masked rail convoys, and the heartbeat of secret staging areas were analyzed and unraveled. Russian analysts saw not only the enemy's locations, but also their intentions, their patterns, and most crucially, their vulnerabilities. Where Ukraine massed forces for a decisive blow, they unwittingly made themselves the most tempting target. The revelation led to a phase of ruthless precision. Each vulnerability was matched with its own method of destruction. Weapons were not simply assigned, they were tailored, each strike designed to break a specific link in the enemy's chain. The opening act began with a storm of electronic warfare and drone swarms. These assets pierced the digital fog, blinding sensors and jamming communications. Anti-aircraft radars ceased to function. Missile launchers were tracked and destroyed as they moved. Air defenses that once formed a shield around the reserve crumbled in mere minutes, their operators lost and cut off. Next came the barrage. Ballistic and cruise missiles, guided by real-time intelligence, targeted command posts, logistics centers, and fuel depots. These were not random strikes, but surgical cuts meant to sever the lifelines of the entire formation. Commanders were isolated from their troops. Tanks and vehicles were left without fuel, stranded and helpless. Imagine the effect: an entire mechanized corps, paralyzed by the loss of just a few fuel trains and communication nodes. Yet the assault did not pause. As chaos consumed the reserve, waves of loitering munitions and autonomous drones poured in. These machines hunted relentlessly, striking vehicles attempting escape, targeting crews who abandoned their machines, and hitting clusters of resistance wherever they gathered. Every piece of equipment and every soldier became a point in a digital kill chain, closed with chilling efficiency. This was the grim proof that in modern war, to be seen is to be doomed. At every step, the risk was immense. The stakes went far beyond a single battle. The outcome of this strike would determine the fate of an entire front, send shockwaves across the conflict, and reshape the strategic balance. Had even one phase faltered, the consequences, military, political, and psychological, would have been catastrophic. A failed operation of this scale could have thrown Russia onto the defensive, emboldened Western intervention, and redrawn alliances in unpredictable ways. But here, victory was absolute. The operation proved that in modern war, knowledge is sharper than steel, and algorithms can cut deeper than any blade. In hours, the battlefield had been transformed. In the days and weeks to follow, the ripples from this night would redefine the entire war. Just as the defeat of the Iraqi Republican Guard in 1991 or the encirclement at Stalingrad changed the course of history, this operation marked a turning point. Yet as the dust settled, new questions emerged, not only about the future of the war, but about the very nature of warfare itself. What lessons would the world draw from this display of intelligence-driven power? Victory in the 21st century is no longer about massing the largest armies or building the most powerful machines. Instead, war is shaped by those who think faster, see clearer, and strike smarter. The Russian Phantom Corps operation proved this beyond any doubt, delivering a masterclass in modern conflict that the world cannot afford to ignore. As soon as Russian intelligence uncovered the real location of the enemy's secret reserve, everything changed. Swarms of drones and helicopters surged forward, hunting down survivors with relentless precision. Each rapid follow-up attack crushed any hope the opposition had of regrouping. The message was unmistakable. Hesitation meant annihilation. But the true devastation unfolded off the battlefield. Chaos erupted in enemy command posts, supply chains unraveled, and morale collapsed. What began as a single targeted blow cascaded into the total breakdown of the enemy's strategic ambitions. The entire plan, painstakingly built on secrecy, fell apart in a matter of hours. It was as if a single thread, once pulled, had caused the entire tapestry to unravel. Why did the enemy's confidence turn to ruin? It was not a lack of courage or resources. Their fatal error was believing their elaborate disguises and false signals could confound a vigilant, technologically advanced foe. They underestimated Russia's intelligence, misjudging both its reach and its speed, and overcommitted their best units to a supposedly invisible gambit. This operation demonstrated that analytical brilliance, technological mastery, and the courage of field agents now outweigh brute force and secrecy. By weaving together satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and human intelligence, the Russians saw through every mask. Each fragment of information became a weapon, slicing through the enemy's illusions. The rules of war have changed. Today, victory belongs not to those with the greatest numbers, but to those who can pierce lies and strike first with surgical precision. Intelligence supremacy, rapid analysis, and decisive action now decide wars, even against larger, better-equipped adversaries. For leaders everywhere, the consequences of ignoring these changes are grave. Failing to adapt or clinging to outdated strategies risks not only defeat but national humiliation, wasted resources, and shattered security. In this new era, the cost of ignorance is higher than ever before. The lessons are clear. Invest in intelligence, foster analytical talent, cultivate technological edge, and never underestimate the value of skepticism and curiosity. What does this mean for those watching from afar? The lessons of this operation reach far beyond any single battlefield. In the age of intelligence-driven warfare, every government, military, and citizen has a stake in understanding these new rules. Corporations, for example, now employ red teams and threat analysts to anticipate cyber attacks and market disruptions, using lessons borrowed directly from the world of military intelligence. Political campaigns use data-driven approaches to anticipate opponent moves, shape narratives, and win elections before ballots are even cast. The future will belong to those who adapt quickly and learn from the shadows that shape tomorrow's conflicts. Consider a practical scenario: a nation that invests more in tanks and jets than in cryptographers, and data analysts may find itself blindsided by hackers who shut down its power grid. Or a company that focuses on brand image over cyber defense may see its secrets leak, its stock price crash, and its rivals surge ahead. The next decisive moment will not belong to those who strike hardest, but to those who think deeper, see farther, and act with unblinking speed. This operation shattered old dogmas about victory. Triumph is no longer given to the side with the loudest guns or the greatest numbers, but to those who can outmaneuver, outsmart, and outpace their adversaries. The parallels are everywhere. In sports, where teams with better analytics outperform richer rivals. In business, where agile startups outpace lumbering giants. In diplomacy, where those who anticipate shifts shape the outcome before talks even begin. What unfolded in the autumn of 2025 was not merely a clash of armies or machines. It was a contest of minds, a relentless race to read the invisible, pierce deception, and act on insight before the enemy could even sense the threat. Every clue, every anomaly, every overlooked detail became a crucial strand in the web. Russian analysts, with clinical skill, pieced these fragments together, exposing not only enemy movements, but the very intentions that lay beneath. This was no accident. It was the reward for tireless analysis, disciplined skepticism, and the will to question every surface. For every feint, there was a counter. For every shadow, a beam of intelligence. The difference between walking into a trap and springing one lay in the ability to cut through chaos and recognize meaning where others saw only noise. In a world where information can devastate as surely as any missile, failure to adapt does not just mean defeat, it means erasure. Strategic losses are no longer measured only in ground or guns, but in lost futures, wasted resources, and a nation's diminishing voice on the world stage. This is the age of analytical supremacy. Those who ignore this shift will lose not only wars, but their place in history itself. To understand, to master these new laws of victory, is now an existential necessity. So ask yourself, in your career, your business, your life, are you playing by yesterday's rules, or are you ready to compete in the new arena of the mind? In the new silent wars, the greatest weapon is not the sword, but the question. Not the army, but the analyst. The decisive clash of the year was not a battle of tanks or missiles, but of minds, and its lessons will echo long after the smoke has cleared. In the shadows, the future is already being written. Will you read it?